Thank you, Rashram, for inviting me. Wonderful to see you all here. This is a treat. This is the best of the films of the Cacoyannis trilogy. It's a film of 1977. I want to tell you a couple of things both for the original play and for Cacoyannis. So I'll start with Cacoyannis because politics really matters. In 1974, it was the end of the Greek military dictatorship that started in 1967. Around that time, 1974, they found oil on the island of Thassos, and there was the issue of who is going to be allowed to drill. And Turkey also had, was looking to participate in this. Now, in the military dictatorship, the notorious head of the security police took over and overturned the military dictator, Papadopoulos. So his name was Ioannidis. And he tried to meddle in the politics of Cyprus. He tried to create a coup in Cyprus and tried to murder Archbishop Makarios in Cyprus. He failed. But that was in July of 1974. A few weeks later, on July 20th, that was the date of the Turkish invasion. So that was a few days ago, was the anniversary of 44 years. Now, Cacoyannis in 1974, right after, he was so shocked by this major disaster that happened on his island, that moved to Cyprus, and he created a documentary called Attila 1974. In that documentary, he interviewed mothers who had lost their children. And he will obviously try to place some blame with the Greek government. What you'll see in this film, which we heard last time and you see also in your program, was written, the screenplay for this film was written 15 years before the actual shooting of the film. And he tried to match electorate Trojan women to the Ifigenia, bringing in elements that he had used in the previous films, including some of the actors, and the music composer, Theodorakis. Now, during the time of military dictatorship, both Cacoyannis was in exile and Theodorakis was in house arrest and exile. So now this is the time post the independence of the military dictatorship that they all work together, along with the main actors that we had seen in Electra and playing Helen in Trojan Women. Now she's going to be Clytemnestra in one of the most important sort of roles in the Iphigenia. So that's with respect to Cacoyannis. This film, as the Electra, were nominated for Best Foreign Film for the Academy. The Electra won the jury award in Cannes, and in this film probably is using most of what he's learned, and he's he's been recognized already internationally for the way that he develops Greek tragedy. But also, as I said last time, he received 3 Oscars and 6 nominations for his Zorba the Greek. Now, the original play was produced in 405 BC, a year after the death of Euripides. So Euripides, as we discussed last time, towards the end of his life, he went to the kingdom of King Archelaus in Macedonia. The film was produced after his death by his son. The ending of the original, not film, the play. So the ending of the original play has maybe 2 alternative endings. So it ends, and we actually think that portions of that play were interpolated, which means that there were add-ons, especially in the second half of the play. And then at the later sort of centuries, you also have a second ending. So Ifigenia, it means, you probably know genealogy, so genus is the family, the sort of family relationship, and Iphi means strong. So Ifigenia, the name of Ifigenia means strong root, strong family. So in the original then, as we said, we have alternative endings. and it was after the death of Euripides. Now, as you watch this film, the chorus is not what we have seen earlier on. So you will have a more kind of distant chorus and more fully fledged characters. The camera is used again as an eye to guide the audience. So pay attention to how the camera is moving. If you have low angle, so if the camera is shooting from low up, the result is that you magnify the person. So you want to show, for instance, the seer Calchas as being very important. If you have high angle from up looking down, that person probably is vulnerable. So pay attention to that, as well as pay attention to the opening scene, and that kind of mirrors the ending scene. So we can talk about this at the end. This is a long film, it's 130 minutes, so get ready for that. But it's the, I think, best and easier to follow of all the three. So enjoy. Okay, so let's see if we can start the discussion at this point. What I wanted to tell you at the beginning of our discussion is that the actual original play starts from the moment that Agamemnon meets the old man and is changing his mind, and he wants to stop his wife from, actually his daughter from coming. So, okay, so the first part is a prologue that Cacoyannis created. Now, since I've given you the background, the historical background, or actually the political background, imagine that we are 44 years later, and in this sort of commemoration of this retrospective for Cacoyannis, just for a minute to pause and think that 44 years later, the Turkish invasion is still going. So the part of Cyprus that was conquered in 1974 is still under occupation. Having that in mind, when you see Clytemnestra, she is the voice of those mothers that lost their children during that war. Now think again about Irene Papas as the Greek tragic heroine. In 1963, there was another murder, political murder, that happened in Greece, of George Lambrakis, who was a politician that could have potentially won the elections, and he was murdered 4 years before the military dictatorship, probably by people who did not want him to become a strong power. This story was documented, or actually there was a novel by Vasilis Vasilikos, and that became a film by Costa Gavras called Z. In that film, Irene Papas played the wife of the politician that was George Lambrakis. So we've seen Irene Papas already as Electra, as Helen, and now as Clytemnestra, and you see that the stage ends with her eyes. And her eyes, from the motherly eyes of pain, there is a line there that says, let's unite our pain and turn it into a lamentation. So now her lamentation is what fuels her hatred. And these eyes are looking across the sea and will be waiting for Agamemnon when he comes back. So that's the kind of last eyes, because there's a lot of play with his eyes across the film. So the eyes stand, this zooming in and out of the eyes, and what perspective do we look at the world from, is, I would say, replaces in a large percentage the role of the chorus. So the chorus, we only see the chorus the moment that the mother is singing a song, and then the chorus says something about love. Let's make love not that mad love that will take the wits of people. And then at the very end, the song that she sings to her daughter after the daughter has decided that she's going to die is a lamentation song. Now, going back to the original, there is a rule in Greek tragedy, actually 3 of them, that there ought to be a unity of time, place, and character. So time, tragedy happens within 24 hours. Okay? In the case of place, usually usually you stay in the same place. Very rarely we have exceptions where the chorus leave the stage and we have a new place, a new location. And then there is the issue of the consistency of character. So in Aristotle Poetics, which is the work where Aristotle was giving literary criticism on how to write the best tragedy, Iphigenia in Aulis, this play, was criticized for inconsistency of character. And that referred to the character of Iphigenia. How could she, at the beginning, not want to die, and at the end go willingly to this sacrifice? Now, if we put this in the context of ancient Greek ideas about sacrifice and sacrificial victims, they had a number of rituals that emulated the approval or the agreement of the sacrificial victim to the sacrifice. So if they had an animal, they would use water to sprinkle on the animal, and the animal was trying to kind of get rid of the water, and they considered that as a noding, as if the animal said yes. Right? Now, if the animal did not agree, that could bring pollution to the city. Right? So they had this kind of ritual. So in that sense, the sacrifice of Iphigenia needs to have her approval. Otherwise, there will be curse in this political body that is the city-state. So that's something to have, is a general context to have in mind. I do want to open questions to you, and then from there I may have ideas and fill in gaps if you have any. So can we start with the first question?
Watching this at the end, how she is so distraught, over losing her daughter and when Orestes is with her, it's hard to picture how then later they killed her. That makes me feel like she was a wonderful mother.
Good. Okay. So let me repeat that question. So the question is about Clytemnestra being a good mother, okay? And that is an element, a loving mother. Now this is an element that comes in as part of the intention of Cacoyannis. Cacoyannis in this film gives the motivation to Clytemnestra for what is known to be her later fate or decision, let's say. Because as we know in the cycle of the myth, after 10 years of war, she holds on to that hatred, so she gets the motivation that Agamemnon killed her firstborn. And when he comes back after 10 years of war with a concubine, she already has a lover that is the cousin of Agamemnon, and they kill both Agamemnon and Cassandra, that is the concubine that comes with him. So that's usually what you think of in ancient Greece about Clytemnestra. It doesn't come automatically in mind that this was a loving mother. So that is a decision that Cacoyannis has really taken by showing her in the first course by singing songs, caring for her children. There is another daughter, then there is the son. She's holding them, she's caressing them, she's singing to them. So that is building her character as a mother. And at the end, when Iphigenia tells her and tells to her father, "You're not just killing me, you're killing my mother." And indeed, what you see is the maternal instinct of Clytemnestra is gone. Now, why is this important? I talked to you last time about polis and oikos. Polis, where politics comes from, is the state.
and oikos is the house, the household. So these are two different realms in ancient Greece that were under the sort of authority of the polis, under the authority of men, and the oikos, the household, under the authority of women. That's why you have Clytemnestra saying, I'm not going to listen to you because this is the realm of my power, the household. My daughter, taking her to marriage. This is what I do. Don't interfere. And he tells her, women are not allowed in the barracks. What are you doing in the army, in the camp? This is not, and you heard Achilles saying that you are not the kind of women that we would see in the barracks, right? So she is out of place. She is in an environment where women normally aren't. But of course, the motivation is that she thought that this is a moment where the oikos, the household, is coming out to have this wedding, right? So I think that what we have here in the background in the original is this severing between oikos and polis. Now, again, placing it within the historical context, 405 is just 1 year before the end of the Peloponnesian War between the city-state of Athens and Sparta, after 30 years of war. So that is towards the end of that war where we know that Athens, in the end, lost that war. So I think that if this is, and as we know, this was produced posthumously after the death of Euripides, Euripides is coming back with this idea of this division between the city-state and the family. And I was trying to find my, how would I translate better the word Iphigenia? So it was translated in there as bloodline, so strong bloodline. So the family having a root, being the one that is the motivation for men to go out and fight, is not the case. They fight for the city-state, and that is more powerful than the individual. So that's what you see here, I think.
Yeah. The original, would it be fair to say that instead of saying, I'm doing this for Greece, they would say, I'm doing this for Argos, their city-state? And secondly, Odysseus seemed like a rather bad character. And was it the same in the original? And if so, was his his many journeys and trials, was this some sort of punishment for anything role he played against Iphigenia?
Okay, very good question. I will repeat it. So it is, would the heroes fight for their city-state or for Greece? Now you hear here, and also in the original, there is this kind of, if we place this myth, the myth about fighting for the whole of Greece, in the context of 405 BC. In the Peloponnesian War, you have men fighting for the city-state, not for Greece. So why would, and we can just guess now, why would Euripides, towards the end of his life, come up with something like that? Now, before the Peloponnesian War, during the Persian Wars, what united the city-states was a common enemy, the Persians. During the Peloponnesian War, you have the allies of Athens fighting the allies of Sparta. So in fact, they are not uniting under a common ethnic identity, but each one had the local city-state identity. So if you have a myth that comes towards the end of the Peloponnesian War, bringing back ideas about fighting united, it could have maybe associations or intentions by Euripides that are bigger than the city-state of Athens. But again, since this is posthumously produced and not whole as a play, we can only conjecture. So that's what I would say. So again, this is a myth that refers to the Trojan War. that supposedly it's set around 1200 BC. And so for the Greeks at 404 or 405 BC, this is a legendary myth of an earlier period where Greece was together, united. Okay, so that's that. Now, with respect to Odysseus, the question was, why is Odysseus such a villain? Now, Odysseus could stand for those who are scheming. Remember how I told you about there are two gods of war. One is Ares, and the other one is Athena. Now, Ares is a male god who uses violence, uses duels, whereas Athena is a female goddess, a virgin goddess that is born out of the head of a father, of Zeus, and she is using strategy in war. So you don't have to kill, you need to outwit your opponent. So in the time of the 5th century, they personified persuasion. They even she was a minor deity that had her own sets of rituals and was worshipped at the Acropolis, the citadel of Athens, where there was the sort of public assembly of the Athenians. So how do you win an argument when you are participating in a public assembly? You need to be very strong with words. You need to have persuasive arguments. So the idea of cunning intelligence, which is what strategic thinking would stand for, is introduced as a female thinking power in the 5th century. The goddess is persuasion, Peitho, who is a goddess that is able with words to persuade the people. And so I think Odysseus stands as the man who uses these words to give wrong advice to the people. So it's about scheming and politicians. And so at the end of the Peloponnesian War, I've given you examples of where the Athenian assembly, the body, they were persuaded to take the wrong action, and then they changed their minds. So it's interesting to see that all this play is about a deliberation, about decision making. Should the head of state or the head of this huge expedition make this decision or not? Is he free, or is there a compulsion? And the word compulsion or necessity seems to be replacing ideas about divinity, God, in the history of the Peloponnesian War written by Thucydides. So the idea of necessity or compulsion becomes something that even gods in Homer need to kind of follow. This is something that has to do with the way of the world that everybody kinds of follows.
Thank you. Before the film started, you were talking about the time when the film was made, the time of Crete and Turkey, etc. And that time was also the time of the Vietnam War and a lot of anti-war sentiment. And I was trying to figure out, because if you take the film literally, it's a film about sacrificing for the greater glory of Greece, that, I'm doing all this for all of Greece. But you can see a different subtext, where if you look at it and you go, no, the army kind of sucks. They made all this happen. Agamemnon wouldn't have had to sacrifice his daughter for the cause of the war and for Greece. And so I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are when Cacoyannis made this film. Which attitude did he really have in his heart? Was he saying that people should sacrifice for the greater glory of the nation? Or was he saying, yeah, that's not so great?
Well, thank you for this question, which is indeed a very good one. I didn't want to answer it completely, so I made an introduction, and I didn't want to, and I can now, tell you what Cacoyannis' intention was, the way that I understand it and the way that he's actually been very outspoken about this. So Ifigenia is the sacrificial victim, and for Cacoyannis it is Cyprus that was sacrificed for the independence of Greece from the military dictatorship. So that was the kind of association he was making. But you're right, this unites with the losses in Vietnam War, losses in Algiers, in Greece, so he is speaking to the world. And what he's trying to make is the point that this Turkish invasion to the island of Cyprus is wrong. Now, I mentioned that he did this documentary, Attila 74. He tried to hold accountable the Greek military. And indeed it was, because it was during the military dictatorship. So when he started doing this film, as you saw, there are 2,000 people that participated as soldiers on the beach. And these are real soldiers that the Minister of Defense of Greece allowed for them to participate, although the Greek military wasn't very fond of the kind of criticism that they were implicated in all the public outcries that Cacoyannis was making, and others from Cyprus. So Evangelos Averof, who was the Minister of Defense, allowed this. Now, another element that maybe you noticed, maybe not, when the girl Iphigenia, who was only 13, when she first appears, she is at some ruins. Did you recognize what these ruins were? They were the palace of Agamemnon in Mycenae. So this was quite rare to receive this permission to actually shoot in these ancient ruins. And that happened exactly because this message that Cacoyannis had was a message that had to be heard. And so the state of Greece allowed this to be shot in these ruins. So I think that the state of Greece and Cacoyannis tried to make his voice as loud as possible, because that was a political issue. They wanted the world to unite in this outcry, public outcry against the Turkish invasion and this state that has not yet been recognized, Turkish Cypriot state, to this day.
Thank you.
Two remarks that I'm curious about that I thought were important but weren't developed were the oracle, even though it was a false oracle. Originally, he said, because you desecrated and shed blood in the sacred forest of Artemis, then you have to make this sacrifice. And it reminded me of the destruction, that can happen around military bases and just. And the other thing was when Agamemnon said to Menelaus, the army has been simmering for war, the gold of Sparta, anyway, and you've just given them an excuse, right? So how relevant are those two lines?
Thank you. So let me take the first one, actually the second one, about the gold of Troy. So the pretext was that there is a woman, Helen, and that's the pretext for the expedition to Troy, but actually that is masking, covering the irredentist politics, the politics where you actually want to, it's imperialistic politics, when you want to go and conquer and take. So that's the pretext. Now, with respect to the oracle, you saw at least in the film, what you have, the introduction provided by Cacoyannis is this Agamemnon giving the order. When you see at the beginning, it's very hot and the soldier faints, and then they don't have enough food. They go to this sort of quiet, idyllic forest where there are priests dressed in white, and we gather that probably this is sacred sheep, or this is a flock that they guard, and Agamemnon gives the order, kill. So they go and they kill, but then he says, don't kill the sacred deer, but it's too late. So I think that stands for the pillaging that the Greeks are doing in Troy later on, and also implicates Agamemnon, because he told them, go and do this, and then by the time he said, don't go that far, they've already have gone very far. Now, Artemis, she had the sacred deer, and supposedly she was offended, and so the oracle that this seer, Calchas, gives is that she needs to be appeased. Now, the way that this is presented in this film, it seems to me that there are some question marks about the authority of Calchas. Agamemnon says at some point that he wants the power, that they're colluding with Odysseus, that this is all about who has the upper hand, and that this religious leader, Calchas or seer, is making this oracle up. So that is the questioning that comes at the end of 5th century in the original, and at the end after the Turkish invasion, where you say, who are these religious leaders? What are these pacts they create, and with whom? How far are they responsible? Now remember, I told you that the head of security police of the military dictatorship tried to instigate a coup in Cyprus and provoked the assassination of Archbishop Macarius in Cyprus. So I'm not sure, again, conjectures, what Cacoyannis is really trying to do, but I'm sure that he is, the way that this is presented, that he's not giving enough motivation and enough credibility to this oracle, because it seems that Agamemnon still thinks that he can avoid it, and the only thing that ties him to his decision is the fact that it is too late, that now already his daughter is there, now the army knows. How can you stop that army if at the beginning he couldn't stop them from killing the sacred deer? So the association between the deer seen at the beginning and then the mirroring at the end, where at first Ifigenia is running away, and you see this dulling of the camera, where we are looking at the world through the eyes of the victim, early on through the eyes of the deer, and then later on through the eyes of Iphigenia. You see that is what we witness there.
To follow up on an earlier question, so is this the general portrayal of Odysseus, that he's an unsavory character? And then the second question, when I was reading a little bit before earlier today, it seems that there are echoes of the story of Ifigenia in the biblical story of Abraham. Is that true? Is there a causal relationship?
Okay, so with the tradition of Odysseus, Odysseus is in the Odyssey called Polytropos, that he has many ways of finding solutions where there are none, right? So the positive way of looking at Odysseus is that he will always find a way out where there is none. The other side of Odysseus is that you can't trust, this is what happened in the 5th century with sophistic argument. You cannot trust people who are very skilled at speaking intelligently, because that gives them power. And so Odysseus stands in for that sophistic argumentation that changes people's minds, and then that's dangerous. So that's the power of rhetoric. Now, is it always that he is like that, Odysseus? Well, not always, but this is what is favored, because we talked about variants of myths.
So this variant of the myth is favored in the late 5th century, where the city-state of Athens, because these tragedies are produced for Athenians, right, in Athens, they feel that they are listening to the wrong advice and they're making decisions that lead to the destruction of, their city and so on. So that's the one that is favored. Now, what was your second one?
About Abraham.
Well, there are those quintessential sacrifices. Would you sacrifice a child for the benefit of a city-state? So it's that, again, family over the benefit of a tribe, of something that is much larger than the family. So I think the stories are reiterated in different contexts. So yes, but also that's the reason, I think. The reason is, for instance, there are laws in 5th century Athens where the democratic Athens was trying to curb excess spending in funeral rites by very wealthy families. So if you are in a democracy, you cannot have someone spending too much over a funeral, because that is a sort of a ritual associated with an earlier period of aristocracy. So in a democracy, you cannot have one family more powerful than another. So I think that in this context of democracy, everybody needs to sacrifice family for the body of the state. So I think that's what comes here. And stories, again, where you sacrifice a child for the benefit of a people, I think that's what is behind those.
I don't really need a microphone. Could you comment on the role of Achilles, and also the alternative ending that you mentioned?
Okay, the role of Achilles. So Achilles is very interesting here, because Achilles is the the hyper-masculine hero of Iliad. And here he says about Iphigenia that she is going to get all the glory, not him. So in this trilogy, last film of this trilogy by Cacoyannis, it's again the victim that will get the glory. And that's what is interesting about Achilles. Again, there is a love interest that is developed, and that's what you have in films by Cacoyannis, and I could talk to you about other of his earlier films. There's always a love interest because he kind of zooms into this relationship between a young man and a young woman. And so Achilles serves as the sort of the male partner for Ifigenia, for a wedding that will never take place, because she's again this motif of marriage into death. So Ifigenia will marry death and not Achilles. So that's what Achilles is kind of used for in this film. The alternative ending. The play ends, and then there is a second ending, which is a messenger speech that comes, and it's an expository portion, a speech, that says that actually Ifigenia, when she was on the altar about to be sacrificed, she disappeared. And instead there was a deer that appeared, and that was sacrificed. And she was wooed to a place in Tauris and became a priestess of Artemis, and that's the Iphigenia in Tauris kind of legend, right? So, so that's that ending. So that she never, and that's what you see in this film. You see that there is wind coming, and you never know what happened to her. But you do see the face of Agamemnon, who's looking, and obviously he sees something we don't. Okay, so there is that.
It's not exactly about the movie, but you mentioned already Ifigenia in Tauris.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you already wrote about it because I saw the play. and I wondered when he wrote that. Clearly not after this one, because he died.
No. Good question. I will, I'll guess, around 413, somewhere there.
412.
418 or
412.
412, okay.
I think.
412, there. And what happens in 412? 412 is also the date of the production of Euripides' Helen and of the play that I wrote about, the Iron. So it's, what happens in 412? Well, it's past the Sicilian expedition. So that's where the Athenian fleet was destroyed in Syracuse. Just before the oligarchic coup in 411 in Athens. So things are very political upheaval in Athens at the time. And in that play, or at least the myth of Iphigenia and Taurus, is that there is a recognition, because that's part of a Greek tragedy, have anagnosis, recognition. This is between brother and sister. And so Iphigenia recognizes Orestes, who arrives there. And yes, it's a happy ending. All right.
All right, last question at the back.
Okay.
Well, you said last question, but I have more than one. But anyway, okay, so the first one's really fast. It's just, I was struck by the fact that Iphigenia said, asked her mother, told her mother, please raise Orestes to be an important man, and then having just seen the movie last week, you know, that's exactly what she did not do. So that struck me. So one question is...
Let me answer this one, okay?
Yeah.
So Iphigenia at the very end, one of the arguments she uses to try and convince her mother to let her go is, look at all these men, look at the army in front of us. They too had mothers. So the argument that she has, she's speaking to her maternal qualities. And when she goes, she says, raise Orestes. So she's trying to have her focus to her maternal instinct and continue. But there is a scene in Cacoyannis where Clytemnestra is holding the hand of Iphigenia as she's leaving, and then she holds onto the veil, and then she lets go. And that's the moment that she changes. Clytemnestra is no longer a mother. She let go of that quality, although Iphigenia told her, you know, continue being a caring mother. She's no longer that. What fuels her is hatred and revenge. And that's the next cycle of Clytemnestra's life.
Okay, thank you. In here, upside down, there's a comment about the casting of the actress who played Iphigenia looking so deer-like. And it was very interesting to me that the scene, I mean, I thought, wow, she really looked kind of like that stag that was shot. She really,
Yeah.
her face, and when she ran trying to escape, I mean, her head is kind of forward on her neck. The way she moved, it was very much like that. So there's this, you know, and of course, so in the symbolism of her standing in for the deer, Artemis is saying, hey, you know, you want me to do you a favor, give me your daughter in lieu of my deer that you killed. Okay, so I get all that. The thing that struck me, so I thought that was beautifully done. I thought it was so interesting that this young, you know, this young girl, young woman, so vulnerable and fragile, you know, really gathers her inner power in her warrior and her earth mother, whatever you want, whatever the right language would be to describe her. She's the one who gets really centered and gets this clarity, so much more so than her father, you know, so much more so. And so it struck me that again, the filmmaker was saying, you know, the women, it just seems to me like he just keeps saying, you know, the women who are the victims, the women are the strong ones. That's
Okay,
just,
so let me say a couple of things because I will forget, so I need to get this in. Okay, so I have written something about this, so you can read up on that, where I talk about Tatiana Papamoscu being deer-like. This is because in a private conversation, and I think in interviews, Cacoyannis also discussed how he found this actress. So he was flying on Olympic Airways, and she was sitting in front of him, and he saw the back of her neck, and asked permission by the parents and cast her. She was not an actress. So in another documentary that is the making of, Cacoyannis is seen teaching both Ifigenia, this Tatiana Papamoscu, the actress, and the young boy Orestes. So you see him in the process of teaching them how to act these roles. Now, so that's the sort of the choice of the actress. I mentioned before the criticism of Ifigenia about the inconsistency of character, but in Cacoyannis, the way that he's adapted the script for his film, he has provided this young actress and Ifigenia a motivation for her change of character, which is very believable. And I spoke earlier about the deliberation scene of how the king of the Greeks cannot make up his mind, and that is seen as weakness, and he knows that if he is seen as being weak, he cannot lead this expedition to Troy. So that's how in the tradition Agamemnon, Menelaus are seen as leaders of the army that do not command the respect of the army always. And you see Achilles, again, in that tradition of saying, I don't follow them unless if they're doing the right thing. So that's another kind of part of that tradition.
Thank you. There was one lesson I wanted to ask, and that is, maybe I'm making the wrong conclusion here, but the fact of the matter is that even though his killing his daughter was a monstrous thing to do, the fact of the matter is that the winds blew. As soon as she was dead, the winds blew. It's like, well, I guess he was right if he wanted to win the war. And I just wondered what you think about that. And this, again, it's a question about morality and divinity and all that.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think that what Cacoyannis is doing is leaving it up to us. I mean, he doesn't tell us what happened to her. We know that the winds blew and the expedition will take place. What I liked more, and I would answer to you by focusing on that, is how Ifigenia was decorated with this wreath, and she asked for her bridal costume as she goes. And I link this to the beginning of Pasolini's Medea, where there is sort of almost a documentary-like introduction of the sacrificial lamb, or the sacrificial victim. There is a young man who's wearing a wreath, who is laughing, who is seen as if agreeing, and then he is being sacrificed and sort of dismembered. And these are traditions that have their beginning in fertility rituals, where at the time of spring, you make a sacrifice of your first fruits. Not a human sacrifice, as we said last time, but a sacrifice of the first fruits, hoping that you will have a good year for the city-state. So I think that Ifigenia stands in for this wish that if we make the right choices, will the winds help us sail? Will we have the approval of the gods to be successful? So it's this ritual, I think, of trying to get the support of the gods in the new endeavor. Okay, last question.
I did have a question. I was wondering if you could comment on the scene where it's a top-down view, angle of the camera on the courtyard, and the adults are all standing around looking outward, basically, and the only movement there is the little boy running around.
Okay, so they're waiting for Iphigenia. She hasn't arrived yet. And the only person that is moving is the young boy who goes to a shield and starts making noise. So he's playing. I think that the young boy is Orestes, who is the future of this family. And he goes to his father first. And in a similar way to Iphigenia, who says to her mother, remain a mother, and she doesn't, the boy goes to the father to ask him to be a father, and he is not responding. So the boy goes to the shield and starts playing on his own. And who knows what that could be, but this is a boy without a mother and a father. Right? So, he is the future of this family. All right. Well, thank you very much.